All right, Trebosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Jerry and Sora Wolasky, for dedicating all the Shumer Drashos this month. In the zechus for refuah sheleimah for Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira, Shaindy and Avraham Kelman, in memory of their beloved parents, and the zechus of all those who need a refuah sheleimah. Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband of 53 years, Dr. Paul Weinberg. Peretz Moshe ben Avraham David. Selma Woolf, with immense gratitude to Hashem, with Teffilos for health for all in the new year, and Leah Sol as a zechus for refuah sheleimah for our daughter Ilana bas Esther, and for all those in need of yeshuos and refuahs. We obtain the merit of our TALMUD Torah. All of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, the neshamas should have an aliyah, and the families in nechama. But with that, let us begin a really incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Lamed Ches 38, and we are picking up in yahrzeit Hashem on Lamed Zayin Lamed Beis 37b, and we left off Moshav the Kasav Rachmana Gabi Chelev Vidam, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So just to remind ourselves how we got here. It's always good in life to remind yourself how you got here. So remember again in yesterday's daf, already 2 days ago, we saw a machlokes ultimately between the Tanakama, actually yesterday's daf, and Rabbi Eliezer about Chadash. Does the prohibition of Chadash apply in Chutz La'aretz or not? What is the machlokes based on? It's interestingly enough, it's based on the interpretation of one word, Moshav. Tanakama holds that Moshav means after the conquering and settling of the land, and therefore, again, ultimately, the prohibition of Chadash only applies in Eretz Yisrael, whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds that Moshav means anywhere you live, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, the prohibition of Chadash applies even outside of Eretz Yisrael. This opened up then a broader machlokes in terms of how you interpret the word Moshav, and specifically, again, we saw many instances where the Torah uses the word Moshav. And again, that machlokes is the Torah coming to tell me that this is a mitzvah that only applies in Eretz Yisrael, specifically after the land has been conquered and divided, or does Moshav simply mean wherever you live? So now the Gemara is going through some examples of where the Torah uses the word Moshav or Moshav, some form of Moshav, where clearly the mitzvah still applies everywhere, but yet the word Moshav must be used to teach us something. So for example, the Gemara says Moshav, the kasav rachmana gabe chelev v'dam lamali. So also the Torah uses the prohibition of the word of Moshav in your habitation, in your dwelling, by the prohibition of chelev v'dam. Chelev is the prohibition to consume fat, certain fats of the animal. Dam is the prohibition to consume blood. Now listen, obviously these prohibitions apply both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. If that's the case, why does the Torah use the lashon of Moshav? It's stated why. I would have thought Hoel ubeinyana de karbanos ksidi, since there was the prohibition of chelev consumption and dam consumption, of fat consumption and blood consumption, is written in the context of karbanos. I would have thought as follows: Bisman deika karban nisar chelev v'dam, bisman deleka karban lo. I would have thought that when do the prohibitions of chelev and dam apply? Only when there are karbanos. When are there karbanos? When there's a Beis HaMikdash. So since those prohibitions are written in the context of karbanos, I would have thought they only apply when there are karbanos. When there are no karbanos, there's no prohibition. Kamash Malan, the Torah writes Moshav to teach us that what? Wherever you live, those prohibitions apply. Moshav, the kasav rachmana gabi matzu mara lamali. We'll say the Torah speaks about the Torah uses the word Moshav by matzah and marar. So why is that? Istrich Sadai Chamina, I would have thought, since the Torah says you shall eat the carbon Pesach on matzah and maror, I would have thought Bisman Deika Pesach in, Bisman Delaka Pesach lo. I would have thought when there is a carbon Pesach, there is matzah and maror, and when there is no carbon Pesach, there is no matzah and maror. Kamash Malan, the Torah uses lashon of Moshav to teach me what? Even when there is no carbon Pesach, there is still an obligation to go ahead and eat matzah and mar. That was, so we happen to know that that's subject to a whole other discussion, but we'll just go with the drasha of the Gemara over here right now. Next, Bia, the kasev rachmana gabe tzolin lepeter chamor lamali. I will say, now the Torah uses Lashon of Biyah, of entry into the land, by Tefillin and Peter Chamor. Now we already established that what? Tefillin is a Chovas Haguf. Right? Peter Chamor is a Chovas Haguf. So why, in other words, it's a mitzvah incumbent on the person, not on the land. If that's the case, why does the Torah link, or why does the Torah use the lashon, the wording of entry into the land when it comes to these mitzvos? For the following, Rabbi Shmuel, Asa mitzvah zu shebishvila tikanes la'aretz. Ultimately, go ahead and do this mitzvah in order that you merit entering the land. In other words, I will say, by what merit do Klal Yisrael have Eretz Yisrael? And the answer is mitzvos. Mitzvos. This is why, remember again, upon entry into Eretz Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to write Torah on stones, right? V'sarato sam besid, seal it with plaster. We put stones with Kala Torah Kula at the entryway to Eretz Yisrael. Why? In order to show us that our linkage, our connection, and our claim to the land is only rooted in Torah. So it's interesting over here. So the Gemara suggests, why does the Torah use lashon of biyah, of entry into the land, when it speaks about tefillin and peter chamar, to teach me that in the zechus of these mitzvos, we receive Eretz Yisrael. We receive Eretz Yisrael. I will say it's interesting, by the way, what's the connection between tefillin, in other words, why dafka tefillin and peter chamar? And Peter Chamar for Eretz Yisrael. In other words, I understand the message. The message being that we get Eretz Yisrael in the merit of keeping mitzvos. But why dafka these mitzvos? So I will say it's interesting. Very quickly, what's the mitzvah of tefillin? Mitzvah of tefillin, right, has a shal yad and a shal rosh. The Maharsham Maseches Brachos says very beautifully, what the mitzvah of tefillin does is, the shal yad represents my physical abilities. Right, I wrap it on my arm. That's my physical abilities. The shal rosh represents my spiritual and intellectual abilities, because the neshama is in the head, the brain is in the head. So the head is the seat of spirituality and intellect. When a person goes ahead and puts on tefillin, what they're doing is they're binding all of their kochos, they're binding all of their abilities to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm saying, Ribbon Shalom, this arm, this physical prowess, I'm going to use it somehow for you. This head that contains spiritual energy, that contains intellectual energy, I'm giving it to you. Tefillin represents taking of our kochos, taking of our abilities, and pledging to use them somehow in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's Peter Chamar? So we say Peter Chamar is redemption of the firstborn donkey. Chamar, which is donkey, also is lashon of chumrius, also of materialism, of the material, chomer. Let's say Peter Chamor means redemption of the material. What's the goal in life? You see, Judaism is not an ascetic religion. The beauty of Judaism is we believe, enjoy the material world, just use it for some type of higher calling. Use it for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Peter Chamor, redemption of the chumrios, redemption of the material, is the process through which we elevate the material world by using it for sanctified means. So perhaps the Gemara saying is like this: what merit do we have Eretz Yisrael? What merit do we have? Tefillin and Peter Chamar. Through taking everything in this world and lifting it up and using it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the zechus that Am Yisrael has to hold on to Eretz Yisrael. We take our physical strength, we take our intellectual and spiritual strength, we take our material goods, and we use it all in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what gives us the zechus to have Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say, according to the opinion who says Moshav means anywhere you live. So Hainu Dichsiv Vayochlu me'avar ha'aretz mimachras ha'pesach. So it's very interesting. So remember again, so at our core machlokes over here is, how do you understand the word Moshav? Right? What does Moshav mean? Does Moshav mean Dafkan Eretz Yisrael after the land was conquered and divided? Or does Moshav mean anywhere you live? So according to the opinion that says Moshav means anywhere you live, right? And therefore, again, in this context, for example, the prohibition of Chadash, of consuming the new grain before the Karban Omer is offered, is a prohibition that applies everywhere. So then the following makes a lot of sense. The pasuk says, This is in Sefer Yoshua. So we'll say, so the story over here that's unfolding is right as we enter into Eretz Yisrael. This is beautiful. Right as we enter into Eretz Yisrael, the Torah says, "Vayuchlu me'avara aretz mimachras haPesach." When we entered into Eretz Yisrael, right, we ate after we entered into the land, we ate of the new grain after Pesach. Mimachras haPesach means the day after Pesach, second day of Pesach, after the offering of the Omer. So the Gemara says, so ultimately, again, what you see is when Klal Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael, they didn't eat the new grain immediately. They only ate it on the second day of Pesach after offering the Omer. Alma, top of Lamedches, Akruv Omer v'Hadar Achol. So I'll say, you see that when we entered into Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua, one of the first things we did is we offered up the carbon omer, right? And only then did we go ahead and eat chadash. Now, I'll say, what does that show you? That shows you that the prohibition of chadash applies everywhere. Because obviously when we enter into Eretz Yisrael, and we're with Yoshua, that's before the land was conquered. That's before the land was divided. So it must be that the word moshav by chadash means the prohibition applies wherever you are, and therefore is applicable even before we entered into Eretz Yisrael, but certainly as we entered in, before the land was conquered and divided. Ella, both said Lamed Chesam Dal 38a, first line. Ella Laman Amar Achar Yerusha Yeshiva, but according to the opinion that says Moshav means after you enter the land, conquer it and inherit it, right, and settle it, Nechol La'alter, then I both say that should mean the prohibition of Chadash shouldn't be in effect yet, right? The prohibition of Chadash shouldn't really kick in until after we go ahead and conquer and divide the land. If there's no prohibition of Chadash, then what can you eat? What can you eat? Whatever you want. Whatever you want. So why are they waiting until the second day of Pesach, until the offering of the Omer, to eat of the new grain? To which the Gemara says, right, nechal la'alter. I'm sorry. Elamadar la'achri yushav yeshiva nechal la'alter. Lo avetzrichi dichsiv. So we'll say lo avetzrichi. The Gemara says, you're right. They didn't need to eat the new grain. So we'll say, so the Gemara is answering, the truth is, we can't actually draw any kind of conclusion from here for the simple reason, Klal Yisrael did not need to eat of the new grain when they entered into Eretz Yisrael. The new grain being the grain they harvested in Eretz Yisrael. Why not? The Teffilos is incredible. Ubnei Yisrael achlu es haman arba'im shana ad ba'am al eretz no shavas. So we'll say Klal Yisrael 8 months for 40 years. So we'll say, again, just to clarify the question, we're going back to our core issue. Our core issue is the word moshav, right? It's all moshav all the time. In other words, we'll say, what does the word moshav mean? 2 ways of interpreting it. Moshav can mean b'chol moshavo seichem, wherever you live, which means again that the particular prohibition will apply anywhere and everywhere at all times. Or no, moshav could mean only after you go ahead and enter into Eretz Yisrael, conquer the land, and divide it up. Okay, so now, based on that, the Gemara says, here's the story. Klal Yisrael enters into Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yehoshua. The pasuk says, when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, they went ahead and they ate of the grain on the second day of Pesach, Mimacharas HaPesach. So we'll say, now, the pasuk is being specific, they dafka ate the new grain on the second day of Pesach and not before. What does that show you? That sounds like what's happening over here is they wanted to first offer up the carbon omer before they ate of chadash. What does that show you? The prohibition of chadash applied to them. What does that show you? That the word moshav must mean what? Wherever you are, whenever you are, because obviously this is before they conquered and settled the land. So the Gemara is bringing this as a proof that Allah, the word moshav means wherever and whenever you are. To which the Gemara says, no, it doesn't. The reason they didn't eat of the new grain until the second day of Pesach was for a different reason. They didn't need it. They didn't need any actual food until the second day of Pesach. Why not? Because they had man. So the Gemara says, watch this. Tichsiv, Ubnei Yisrael achlu es haman arba'im shana, ad bo'am el eretz no shaves, es haman achlu ad bo'am el kitzei eretz kinan. So let's listen to this. So the pasuk says as follows. The pasuk says, no Sheves, sorry, no Sheves, no Sheves. So the pasuk says, Klal Yisrael ate the man for 40 years until they came. Now here's what's interesting. Ad Eretz no Sheves. I will say, Eretz no Sheves Rashi means full entry into the land. Full entry into the land. Settled land, right? Ad Bo'am el Kitzei Eretz Canaan. Until they came, I will say, Kitzei means the edge of the land. Now the edge of the land means the Transjordanian lands, actually right before entry into Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so the pasuk is inherently contradictory. If shalomar ad bo'am al eretz no sheves, shekvar ne'emar el kitzei eretz Canaan. So we'll say, on one hand, you can't say that they came literally into Eretz Yisrael proper, because the pasuk says they came onto the border of Eretz Yisrael. V'yev shalomar el kitzei eretz Canaan, and you can't say they came to the border of Eretz Canaan. Shari ne'emar ad bo'am el eretz no sheves. Pasuk says they came into the settled areas of Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so the pasuk itself is contradictory. The pasuk says, Klal Yisrael ate man until when? Until they came into actual Eretz Yisrael, which I will say again, Rashi points out all the way into Eretz Yisrael, right? In other words, on the other side of the Jordan. And then it says they ate man until they came essentially into the Transjordanian lands, which is on the right before they crossed the Jordan. So which one is it? Which one is it? To which the Gemara says, "Hakeitzad." Watch this. This is incredible Gemara. Hakeitzad. B'shiva ba'adar meis Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar. Upasak man mileret. There was when Moshe Rabbeinu died, the man stopped falling. The man stopped falling. But apparently, I will say, what ended up happening is, after Moshe Rabbeinu died, they went ahead and they subsisted on the man that they had collected in their utensils. So from Ad Shisha Asar B'Nisan until the 16th of Nisan. So I will say, this is pretty incredible. So from the 7th of Adar, Moshe dies, the man stops falling. From the 7th of Adar to the 16th of Nisan, so essentially like a month and 9 days, they subsisted from the man that they had accumulated in their utensils. So I will say, so this Gemara is actually pretty dramatic on a variety of levels. First of all, it sounds like maybe right before Moshe Rabbeinu died, there was an abundance of man that fell. That's number one. Number two, the second miracle says, remember again, normally you couldn't what? You couldn't store man. You couldn't store man. The whole chap of man is that you accumulated the man you needed for the day, and after that, whatever you tried to save, it would spoil. So apparently some type of miracle occurred. But here's what happened. Moshe Rabbeinu dies on the 7th of Adar, and then again they accumulate the man. They subsist on that man until the 16th of Nisan. I will say, then what happened? Now the pasuk makes sense. Then on the 16th of Nisan, they no longer had man. So what did they eat? They ate grain in Eretz Yisrael. But it's not the pshat that they waited until the 16th of Nisan to eat the man in Eretz Yisrael because they wanted to go ahead and offer up the carbon omer. Rather, they waited till the 16th of Nisan. Why? Because they didn't need to eat grain until that point in time. Incredible. Tanya idach. Ubnei Yisrael achlas aman 40 shana. Klal Yisrael ate the man for 40 years. V'chi 40 shana achlu. The Klal Yisrael eat man for 40 days. They didn't eat man for 40 years. Valo 40 shana chaser 30 yom achlu. We'll say, in fact, Klal Yisrael ate man 40 years minus 30 days. Minus 30 days. And I will say, why minus 30 days? Because when we left Egypt, remember again, we took provisions with us. Right? Rashi points out the version is Stapku me ugos showed sil me Mitzrayim. Ultimately, again, we subsisted on the bread, on the matzah that we took with us from Egypt. So I will say, so we really ate man for 40 years minus 30 days. First 30 days we subsisted on what we brought from Egypt. So what does that teach in this incredible Gemara? Ugos showed sil me Mitzrayim. Ta'amu bahem ta'am man. So Rabbi say, but what do you see from here? You see from here that the food that we took out of Egypt, right, that we prepared and took out of Egypt, were endowed with the taste of man. So the pasuk says we ate man for 40 years. So for 39 years and 11 months, it was actual man. For the first month, it was the food that we brought out of Egypt, but that food was endowed with the taste of man, with the flavor of man, and therefore the pasuk treats it as if we consumed man for 40 years. They will say, what does that mean? That the food we took out of Egypt went ahead and tasted like man? So they will say, man is food from the Ribono Shel Olam. So how could something that man makes ultimately taste like food from the heavens? So I'll say perhaps these sodas like this kind of tied into what we were saying before as well. When a person infuses ruchnius into his gashmius, the gashmius tastes like ruchnius. Meaning what? That here, when Klal Yisrael left Egypt, we'll say we were preparing provisions. Can you imagine? Think about a Jew leaving Egypt. Right? A Jew leaving Egypt is preparing food for his family. Where is he going? What is he doing? How is this all going to work? And the answer is, he has no idea. So why is he going? Like we read in Zichronos, in Chazaras HaShatz, on Rosh Hashanah, Zacharti lach chesed neurayich, avas kilulosayich, lechtech acharai b'mimbar. The Moshe says, I remember the love of our youth. Because Baruch Hu says to us, I remember the passionate love of our youth. That's a reference to us in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we were a fledgling nation, you followed me out into the desert, and you had no idea where you were going. So I will say, when we were in Egypt, we prepared food to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu out into the desert. And if somebody would have asked, where are you going? So he would have said, not sure. And who are you following? The Ribono Shel Olam. And why? Because he said so. He'll say, that's love. That's commitment. That is the pinnacle of ruchnius. When you prepare your food, when you prepare your physical food with that level of ruchnius, that gashmi, that physical food, becomes something holy, becomes something spiritual. That physical food begins to taste like man. And isn't that the goal in life? The goal in life is to infuse our gashmios with ruchnios. And when you do that, your gashmios will taste like ruchnius. Incredible. So I'm going to go weiter. Tanya Idach. Gemara goes weiter. B'shiva ba'adar meis Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar. Or b'shiva ba'adar nolad. And Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the 7th of Adar as well. Minay b'shiva ba'adar meis. How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar? It's actually very interesting. Sheleimah. Vayomas shama Moshe Eved Hashem. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu, the servant of Hashem, died there. So obviously, the Torah doesn't record the date of Moshe Rabbeinu's death. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this question. So the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu died. Okay, uksiv vayifku b'nei Yisrael es Moshe ba'arvos Moav. The pasuk also says that Klal Yisrael cried for Moshe Rabbeinu on the Arvos Moav, on the Transjordanian lands, shloshim yom, for 30 days. So uksiv vahi achrei Moshe Eved Hashem. And then the pasuk says after Moshe died, so Yoshua takes over. Okay, uksiv Moshe avdi meis vi'ata kum avar. Pasuk says, Chashera says to Moshe, to Yoshua, Moshe died, Yoshua take them across the Jordan. Uksiv, Avru b'karav ha'machane, v'tzavu es ha'am le'mor, hechinu lachem tzeda, prepare for yourself food, ki ba'od shloshes yomim tavru es ha'yarden. So Yoshua says to Klal Yisrael, prepare yourself, in 3 days, we're passing through the Jordan, we're going in. Uksiv, v'ha'am alu minei yardin be'esra l'chodesh harishon. And the pasuk says that Klal Yisrael passed over the Jordan when? On the 10th of Nisan. On the 10th of Nisan. So we'll say, here's what we know, right? So just let's do the math. So Klal Yisrael passes over on the 10th of Nisan. Passed over the, right, literally again, pass over. Crossed the Jordan on the 10th of Nisan. Then we'll say, back up. There were 3 days of prep before they were going ahead and crossing over the Jordan. And before that, 30 days of mourning for Moshe Rabbeinu, which means there were 33 days between the death of Moshe Rabbeinu and the crossing over the Jordan. If they crossed the Jordan on the 10th of Nisan, which is a date that we know, back it up 33 days, and what do you have? 7th of Adar. 7th of Adar. So the Gemara says, backtrack, back it up 33 days. So we'll say it's incredible. That's how we know that Moshe Rabbeinu died on the 7th of Adar, based on the Pesukim of Yoshua, because Moshe Rabbeinu died 33 days before we entered into the land of Israel. How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the 7th of Adar? Ben mea ve'esrim shana anochi hayom, lo uchal od laseis v'lavo. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I am 120 years old today. So the Gemara says, She'ein Talmud lomar hayom. There was no reason for Moshe Rabbeinu to add in the word today. Ma Talmud lomar hayom. Why did it say today? Melamin shakalish baruch hu yoshev umamalish noseim shal tzadikim miyom liyom umechodesh lechodesh. Shenemar es mispar yamecha amalei. Now I will say, when Moshe Parshas Vayelech, when Moshe Rabbeinu says this pasuk, this was his last day on this earth. So he says, I'm 120 years old today. Now why today? So today ultimately means that Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, today is my birthday. Right? Today is my birthday. Today is a very unique day. Why I will say, the Ribbon Shalom allows tzaddikim to fulfill their days in this world. As mispar yamecha amalei, I will literally again fill out your days in this world. So we'll say tzaddikim often come into this world and leave this world on the same day. What's the logic of that? The logic is that what it represents is a complete unit of life. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes into this world on the 7th of Adar. Or I should say, we know that he leaves this world on the 7th of Adar. And the fact that it says, I am 120 years old today, I guess it didn't have to say today. Today means Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is my birthday. This is my birthday, which represents the complete unit of my life. And this is the day I take leave of you. Incredible. Tanya Brisa says, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, Shalosh mitzvos nistav Yisrael b'chnisasin la'aretz, v'nagos bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. There are 3 mitzvos that Klal Yisrael were commanded to perform when we entered into Eretz Yisrael, but yet they apply both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Right? V'huadin sheinagu, and it makes sense ultimately again that they should apply. So the Gemara says, now what are the 3 mitzvos? Rashi says the 3 mitzvos were Chadash, Arla, and Kilayim. Chadash, Arla, and Kilayim. Right? So Chadash, the prohibition to eat the new grain before the Omer has been offered. Right? Arla, not consuming the fruit of a tree for the first 3 years. And Kilayim, forbidden mixtures, not consuming forbidden mixtures. So these 3 mitzvos were given to us when we entered into Eretz Yisrael, which was, remember again, we didn't need them in the midbar, right? We didn't need them in the desert. Why not? Why not? We weren't planting anything. Right? So remember again, if you're not planting anything, you don't need these. So we were commanded about these as soon as we entered into Eretz Yisrael, yet they apply inside Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael as well. So the Gemara says, "V'huadin shinago," makes sense. Umachadash sheini sura isra olam veini sura isra na. So I'll say chadash, which again is not an eternal isra, because remember again, it only applies till you offer up the carbon omer, and there's no isra hana. Right, it's not a prohibition to benefit from chadash, only consumption. V'yesh heter li'isuro, and furthermore, again, that which is prohibited becomes permitted. Noig bein baris bein l'chutz la'aretz, and yet it applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in l'chutz la'aretz. Kilayim, then forbidden mixtures, she'isurin isra olam, that are forever prohibited. V'isurin isra na, you can't get hana from kilayim. Vein heter li'isurin, and it never becomes permitted. Eino din shina go bein baris bein l'chutz la'aretz. It makes sense that it applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz as well. Vuadin la'arla b'shtayim, and the same applies by arla, ultimately again in 2 ways. Number one, arla is an Isser Hana, you can't get benefit from it, and ultimately again, that which is prohibited never becomes permitted. So essentially again, these 3 mitzvos given to Klal Yisrael as soon as we enter into Eretz Yisrael, but yet they apply both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara essentially makes a kavachomer. If Chadash, which is a relatively lenient prohibition, applies in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, certainly Kilayim and Arla will apply outside of Eretz Yisrael as well. Good. Rabbi Shimon says on the base, Kol mitzvah shenetztavu Yisrael kodim knisasan la'aretz noheges bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. The acher knisasan la'aretz eino noheges ela ba'aretz. So this is actually very interesting. Rabbi Lazar has a different model. Rabbi Lazar says that halacha l'maisa, any mitzvah that we were commanded to perform before we entered into Eretz Yisrael applies both in and out of the land. Any mitzvah that ultimately, again, any mitzvah that we were only commanded to perform once we entered into the land only applies in the land itself. Look at Rashi, Tab Rashi. Kol mitzvah shenistav Yisrael la'anhigo kodim she'ikansu la'aretz tahainu chovas haguf No hages bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. So we'll say, so ultimately again, what Rabbi Elazar is saying is like this. Any mitzvah we were commanded to perform before we enter into the land. Now we'll say, what type of mitzvah can you be commanded to perform before you enter into the land? A chovas haguf, right? That's the only kind of mitzvah we could have performed before we entered into Eretz Yisrael. So any mitzvah we were commanded to perform before we entered into Eretz Yisrael applies in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Any mitzvah we were commanded to perform once we entered into Eretz Yisrael only applies in Eretz Yisrael and not outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so we're going to say exactly what Rabbi Elazar is saying in just a moment, because it sounds like perhaps maybe he's arguing on what? Maybe he's arguing on Chadash, Arla, and Kilayim. Right? Because remember again, I will say everyone agrees, when were those mitzvahs given to us? When were they given to us? Once we entered into the land. Now remember again, this gets back to Moshav, what Moshav means. But again, hold on to it. Chutz, now the exception is min hashmatas ksafim v'shiluach avadim. Very interesting. The exception to this Rabbi will say is hashmatas ksafim. Hashmatas ksafim is the concept that Shemitah cancels debts, and shiluach avadim. Shiluach avadim is the emancipation of slaves during the Yovel year. Rabbi will say both of these mitzvos were given to us once we entered into the land. Yet Rabbi Elazar says, my rule applies. So again, Rabbi Elazar's rule is, if it was given in Eretz Yisrael, then what? Then what? Then what? It only applies in Eretz Yisrael. The exception to this rule, two exceptions. Number one, Shemitah cancellation of debts, which although it was given in Eretz Yisrael applies everywhere, and emancipation of slaves during Yovel, which as much as it was given in Eretz Yisrael applies everywhere. Applies everywhere. All right, so let's analyze this. Shavapi she'estavolem alachar knisas la'aretz nohages bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. Even though again these two mitzvos of Shemitah cancellation of debts and emancipation of slaves were given in Eretz Yisrael, they still apply everywhere. So let's analyze. So hashmatas ksafim chovas hagufi. I don't understand. Cancellation of debts during the Shemitah year, of course that applies in chutz la'aretz. Or we'll say why? That's a chovas haguf. That's, remember again, let's say, the only discussion about whether or not certain mitzvahs apply outside of the land are mitzvahs which somehow are tethered in agricultural geographic realities, like Chadash, or like Arla. But everyone agrees, about say that any mitzvah that is on the guf, is a chovas haguf, is on the gavra, is on the individual, of course applies in chutz la'aretz. So we'll say, hashmatas ksafim, the idea that Shemitah cancels the debt, ultimately, again, that's a chovas haguf. That's a chovas kavra. That's on the individual. Of course, it should apply in chutz la'aretz. So we'll say, watch this. Lo nitzrucha ela l'chidisanya. No, because the following situation says, Disanya, Rabbi Omer, v'zeh divar hashmita shamot. This is the rule, or this is the law of Shemitah. Shamot. So the Gemara says, b'shtei shmitos hakasim medaber. Torah is speaking about two different shmitos. There are two different shmitas. One is the shmita ultimately of the land, i.e. you have to allow the land to lay fallow, don't work the land. And the other is shmitas ksafim, which is cancellation of debts. So I would have said as follows. So now I would have said, the halacha is as follows. Bizman sha'ata mishamit karka, ata mishamit ksafim. When Rabbi say, when we'll call it agricultural shmita is in effect, so loan shmita is in effect. In other words, when you allow the land to lay fallow, that is when shmita cancels debts. Bisman shiyata mishamit karka, but when there is no shmita of the land, iyata mishamit ksafim. Ultimately, again, shmitas ksafim doesn't apply. Both say, and that is halacha l'maisa. That is halacha l'maisa. In other words, the two shmitas are connected. So when you have actual, we'll call it geographic or agricultural shmita, so shmita of loans apply as well. When you don't have agricultural shmita, the cancellation of debts doesn't apply. He says the Gemara ve'imah. So I would have said b'makom shata mishamit karka ata mishamit ksafim, or b'makom shenata mishamit karka inata mishamit ksafim. So I would have thought to extend this, and I would have thought to say you should say the same halacha in the place, i.e., geographically where shmita applies, agricultural shmita applies. That's where cancellation of debts applies as well. But where agricultural shmita doesn't apply, so cancellation of debts shouldn't apply as well. I will say agricultural Shemitah only applies where? Only applies where? In Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, I would have thought maybe cancellation of debts also only applies in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, Ki Kara Shemitah LaHashem Mikol Makom. Therefore, the pasuk says it is a Shemitah to Hashem, and I will say that tells me that ultimately, again, Shemitah's Ksafim, cancellation of debts, applies everywhere. And I will say that is the halacha, right? That's why today, again, we still do a prusbol, right? Even outside of Eretz Yisrael, if you don't want Shemitah to cancel your debts. So I will say, so again, what you have over here are two different models. On one hand, you have the Tanakama. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yochai telling us that there are three mitzvahs we were given. We were given when we entered into the land, right? Chadash, Arlan, Kilayim, and even though they were given in the land, they apply everywhere, right? Then you have Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon saying normally any mitzvahs given to us in the land only apply in the land. Any mitzvahs given to us outside of the land apply everywhere. Exception to the rule is Shemitah, cancellation of debts, and emancipation of slaves, which although they were given in the land, apply everywhere. So now we've just spoken about Shemitah's cancellation of debts. Next, Shiluach Avadim. So in Rabbi Eliezer Shimon's model, so again, emancipation of slaves also applies outside of Eretz Yisrael. So it says the Gemara, remember again, when is emancipation of slaves? When is that? Yovel. So Shiluach Avadim, Chovas HaGufu. So once again, I will say, the emancipation of slaves is a Chovas HaGuf, right? That's on me, that's on the individual, that's not on the land. So of course it should apply in Chutz La'aretz, to which the Gemara says, since the pasuk says, Ukrasem Durar Ba'aretz, you shall proclaim freedom throughout the land, Ba'aretz in, B'chutza la'aretz lo. I might have thought the land of Asai means Eretz Yisrael. So maybe emancipation of slaves only applies in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz La'aretz. To which the pasuk says, Talmud Lomar, Yovel hi mikol makom. The pasuk says it's Yovel. And that means, again, Yovel, he means it's Yovel wherever you are. And therefore emancipation of slaves occurs to whatever, we'll say, so obviously I'm about Evid Kinani over here, right? Emancipation of slaves ultimately, again, Evid Ivri, right? Emancipation of slaves ultimately, again, occurs wherever you are. Fine. So if that's the case, then why does the pasuk say Ba'aretz in the land when it speaks about emancipation of slaves? Teach me, it's only when Yovel applies in Eretz Yisrael and therefore triggers emancipation that there's emancipation in Chutz La'aretz. So in other words, the emancipation of slaves in Chutz La'aretz is tethered or is rooted in the fact that Yovel is actually occurring in Eretz Yisrael. Ein Durar Noig Ba'aretz. But if Yovel doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz, in Eretz Yisrael, then the emancipation doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, we'll say that is halacha l'maisa. So Tanan Hasa, so we'll say let's analyze a bit more. So we'll say, so again, it's really this fascinating ongoing machlokes about, again, so there's now really two things happening over here. There's number one, in general, what do you do with Moshav, right? So that's kind of like our overarching machlokes about how you interpret that word. And then kind of the subset of that machlokes is, how do you look at mitzvos that were only given to us once we entered into Eretz Yisrael? So do we say that if given in Eretz Yisrael, it only applies in Eretz Yisrael? Or maybe not. Maybe not. Even mitzvos given in Eretz Yisrael weren't meant to be limited to the land, to actual Eretz Yisrael itself, but can apply everywhere. So these two major machlokim unfolding right in front of us. So Tanan Hasam, let's go back there. Tanan Hasam, HaChadash Asr min HaTorah b'chol makom. Chadash, I will say, is Asr everywhere, min HaTorah. There's the Isr Da'oraisa of Chadash, applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Arla, Halacha. Arla is Halacha, and I will say, we'll have to see exactly what Halacha means. Va'kilayim midivrei sofrim. And kilayim, that they apply in Chutz La'aretz, is a D'Rabbanan. So my halacha, by the way, I will say, what does it mean when we say that Arla, right? The fact that Arla applies in Chutz La'aretz is a halacha. Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Hilchas Samedina. So I'll say, Shmuel Bar Yehuda says, Hilchas Samedina means it was a practice that was accepted. Hilchas Samedina, it was a common practice accepted. Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha LeMoshe Misinai. Ula said Rabbi Yochanan, no. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai that Arla applies in Chutz La'aretz. So we'll stop over here for today. So again, fundamental machlokes. So here's what everybody. So I'll say here's what's fascinating. What everyone seems to be agreeing on is that Chadash is Asur D'Oraisa even in Chutz La'aretz. What everyone also seems to be agreeing on is that kilayim, forbidden mixtures, everyone is going to agree is quote unquote only in Isser D'Rabbanan. The machlokes is Arla. Is Arla simply a practice that was observed, or ultimately halacha l'Moshe Sinai, resolution in Yahrzeit Hashem? TORAH will say shkoyach. All right, Chevron, have a great day, everyone.